if you think about, there's sort of two broad ways when you get into definitions of slavery in the study of slavery. There's sort of two historical sort of facets that have been used. So one is the kind of legal approach. This was pretty much the main approach until the 19th century, which is to say that, going back to Roman law, which is to say that slave is somebody who is either, you could say they're not free. So there's free people and there's slaves. A slave is someone who's not free, right? And you can say a slave is someone who's property of another person. Now, that can be a really good definition of slavery. Like, say, in America, like, it's very clear what freedom means in America and in American law. It's very clear what it means to be property in American law versus not property, right? The problem is, if you try and take this as a global definition, you run into a huge issue, which is that freedom in one place is very different than freedom in another place. Property, think about this. When I say a slave is someone who is not free, a free person is somebody who can do whatever they want except what's illegal.
Right.
A slave is somebody who can do whatever they want except what's illegal and what their owner tells them they can't do, right? So, but that just means those are just two different levels of constraint, right? So the rule of what a slave can do in one society is going to be different from what a slave can do in another society. So in some societies, slaves can own property. In other societies, slaves can't own property. So the problem is there's this concept of free and slave, or freedom and what non-freedom, are so context dependent that it doesn't really make sense to use them as a kind of trans-historical definition because they're too vague. Because it's too vague. Similar with property. What is a definition of property? There is no uniform definition of property across different traditions. You could say that property is, a strong degree of right of control over something. Okay, but I mean, what is? So you could say, well, if the slave is your property, then you can kill them without, like, for example, this is this pencil here. I could take this pencil and I could break it. And no one's going to come and say, "Oh, you broke that pencil. What are you doing?" Right? Even if I own like a Picasso, and I decide I'm just going to slice it up with scissors. Everyone can say, "Oh my God, how can he do this? This is mine. I own it. I can do that if I want." This is true. Okay. Now, so I own a slave. That means I just get angry one day and I decide I'm going to kill a slave. So most societies, or I won't say most, many societies, you can't just kill your slave. Your slave, actually, you can't inflict harm on them beyond a certain degree. You can't kill them without consequence, right? They actually have rights. And then let's look at ancient Roman law. You could say, well, Romans could kill their slaves, and that's that's what makes that person property and not free. But get this, officially in Roman law, and this is well into the 2nd century of the Common Era, officially in Roman law, the male head of household could kill his own children or his wife or any member of his household, and it was totally legal.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean people did it all the time.
No, it's rare, but yeah, that's right.
Patria potestas, right? So what's it? I mean, I could kill my child legally. I could kill my slave legally. Where's the difference between being a slave and free in this regard? So you have to see that in different situations, these what we think these concepts of property or free means or doesn't mean doesn't work, right? It means something totally different. Okay, so what happens in the kind of 19th and 20th century up until today is there's more of a move into like a social scientific mode of defining slavery, where you define it more socially and economically. So a slave is somebody who is, for example, anthropologically, they are marginal. So they're the most marginal group in a society. They're the most vulnerable group and the most dependent group in a society. The problem with this definition is that there's certain societies where there's actually people who are slaves, who are called slaves, like in, let's say, Sharia law, the title of abd. They're not free, their property, but they're actually higher than other people. So for example, in Sindh, in what's today Pakistan, in, let's say, the 1700s, there were people who were very low caste were lower than slaves. Similarly, the Ottoman Empire from the 1500s to the early 1700s was administered by slaves of the Sultan. The most powerful people in the Ottoman Empire for 2.5 centuries were slaves of the Sultan. They were the grand viziers. They were the heads of all the administration. They were rich. They were powerful. They're the most powerful people.
I mean, that's remarkable. I mean, I read this in your book when I first read it. I thought, good grief, why have I not come across this before? But this completely upsets my, or perhaps the Western notions of what a slave is, largely to do with American, the experience of American slavery and William Wilberforce here in England and what he tried to abolish in the British Empire. But here we have examples of slaves, legal slaves, categorized as such, owned by others who were powerful people and ruled over nations. And this wasn't like some idiosyncratic, this was institutionalized, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was the Ottoman Empire is probably the best example, but you had the same thing in Safavid Iran. You had the same thing in India, in the Deccan Plateau in the 1500s and 1600s. So very similar. And I mean, these people, they're not just saying like, oh, I'm your slave, Paul. Like I do whatever you want, it's not like that. They're actually legally slaves. Like one Grand Vizier, he wanted to testify in court. He was the Grand Vizier of the Ottoman Empire. They wouldn't accept his testimony in court because slaves can't testify in court in the Hanafi school of law. So I'm sorry, your testimony is no good here. I mean, these people were actually slaves.